Good afternoon. I'm Elliott Derringer, the Executive Vice President of C2ES. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our event today, highlighting the business case for ambitious bipartisan climate action. I'd like to begin with a couple of housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded, and a recording will be posted on the C2ES YouTube page within 24 hours. The format today will be a short presentation, followed by a moderated discussion with the CEO panelists. We'll be taking some audience questions, but due to time constraints, I'm afraid we won't be able to get to all of them. To submit a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your toolbar. Also, we're aware of some internet connectivity issues on the East Coast today. If your connection goes down, please wait a few minutes and re-enter the event. And always please continue the conversation by joining us on Twitter at C2ES_org. In a few moments, I'll hand things off to C2ES President Bob Perciasepe to introduce our featured speakers, a trio of corporate leaders at the forefront of business efforts to meet the climate challenge. But first, I'd like to say a few words about the work C2ES is doing to help ensure that working together, we can seize the extraordinary new opportunities before us to tackle the climate crisis. As many of you are probably aware, part of our mission at C2ES is working with leading companies to build support for effective climate policy. Over the past 3 years, through an initiative called Climate Innovation 2050, we've been working with dozens of companies across all of the key sectors to develop strategies for decarbonizing the US economy. A little over a year ago, drawing on these discussions, we released a major report called Getting to Zero, a US Climate Agenda. In that report, we laid out a comprehensive set of federal, state, and local policies to put the United States on the path to carbon neutrality. Since that time, even in the midst of a dreadful pandemic and an ailing economy, we've been very encouraged to see business support for strong climate action continue to grow, with more and more companies publicly committing themselves to the ambitious goal of becoming carbon neutral. A few months ago, anticipating that the 2020 election might put the United States in a position to vastly accelerate our lagging climate efforts, we launched an intensive series of discussions with companies to see how together we might best capitalize on such an opportunity. As an initial step, 47 of America's top companies joined us in a public statement following the election, urging President Biden and Congress to work together to enact ambitious, durable, bipartisan climate solutions. On Inauguration Day, to make sure that message was heard, we ran the statement on the back cover of Politico. Today, we're pleased to announce our next step. Informed by our discussions with these and other companies, we are releasing a detailed set of recommendations to the administration and Congress. Recommendations that we believe could garner bipartisan support and that, taken together, would establish the essential foundations of an ambitious, just, and durable US climate policy. I'd note that many of these recommendations would also make a very substantial contribution to rebuilding our economy as we begin to recover from the COVID pandemic. The new policy brief we're releasing today updates and distills the recommendations we outlined more than a year ago in our Getting to Zero report. You can find the brief, the full set of recommendations, on the C2ES website, and for the moment, I'd just like to offer a quick overview. First of all, we outline a mix of executive and legislative actions, steps that the Biden administration can and should pursue on its own right away, and steps that Congress should pursue in parallel to vastly increase investment in climate solutions and to provide a strong statutory basis for a truly comprehensive response. We believe one important piece of that legislative agenda is some form of economy-wide carbon pricing, and we recommend that the administration and Congress immediately begin consultations with the aim of enacting a carbon pricing program within the next 2 years. Beyond that, we recommend a broad suite of complementary measures focused on key sectors, including power, transportation, buildings, and industry. These include stronger investment in innovation and infrastructure, incentives for consumers and companies to adopt cleaner technologies, and strong enforceable standards to drive action and to ensure accountability. We need all of these pieces. We need both strong goals and the tools to achieve them. In the power and transportation sectors in particular, we encourage the administration to begin with interagency processes, engaging with industry and with all of the other relevant stakeholders to map out a comprehensive vision of how these sectors get to net zero emissions. Also in the category of executive action, we recommend that the government leverage its enormous procurement power to help create markets for cleaner technologies through the purchase of zero carbon power, vehicles, and other products. To help drive continued innovation, we recommend that Congress scale up climate-related R&D to at least $20 billion a year by 2030 and dedicate $50 to $100 billion over the coming decade to high-impact demonstration projects. We recommend steps to advance carbon removal, including investment and incentives for direct air capture and for nature-based solutions, including measures to help farmers participate in carbon markets. In the area of finance, we recommend steps by the SEC to strengthen the disclosure of climate-related financial risks and by the Federal Reserve Bank to identify and avoid risks to the stability of the US financial system. We recommend steps to integrate climate into trade agreements and to prepare for the use of carbon border adjustments to protect the competitiveness of US industry. Finally, we speak very directly to the need to integrate the climate and social justice agendas. We offer recommendations throughout for ways to address the needs of low-income and marginalized communities, as well as recommendations to help workers and communities who may be harmed economically by the transition away from fossil fuels. This again is just a quick overview. I'd encourage you to check out the brief on our website for the full set of recommendations. As I said earlier, we believe the present moment presents an absolutely vital opportunity to strengthen the US climate effort, one that we must work together to seize. The President has already taken some initial steps in line with some of our recommendations and will likely see more tomorrow. On many of our other recommendations, it will be up to Congress to act. The COVID rescue package proposed by the President provides an initial opportunity. An infrastructure package could provide another, but those likely will only be a start. Our aim must be a comprehensive set of policies that is ambitious, just, durable, and preferably bipartisan, because that's one of the keys to durability. We're pleased to be offering these recommendations today, and we're pleased to have had so many companies working with us to bring them forward, demonstrating once again the strong and growing support within the business community for meeting the climate challenge. Again, thank you for joining us. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand things off to Bob Perciasetti.
Okay, Elliott, thank you. Thank you for that. It's great to be here with everybody, and I'm looking forward to the discussions. We want to open and steer the conversation a little bit to how businesses across different sectors of the economy are both affected by the climate crisis, but also, why are they addressing their own work in this regard, and why are they beginning to engage policymakers in these efforts? We have a great panel with us today, an excellent panel with us today, joining in the conversation, and they represent companies that are part of the Business Council and business leaders that C2ES works with. Each of these companies, Bank of America, PSEG, and LafargeHolcim, are among the 47 companies that Elliott mentioned signing the statement. And we hope that this conversation can continue to illustrate why this challenge across the entire economy is really important. It's not just electricity and cars, but it's also finance and manufacturing and basic materials. All these different sectors are intimately involved. So we have with us today a great panel, and let me just quickly introduce them. I can't possibly give you all the different things that these folks have done in their careers and continue to do, but let me just give you a picture. Anne Finucane, who is Vice Chair of Bank of America and Chair of Bank of America Europe, is responsible for the strategic positioning of the Bank of America and leads the company's environmental, social governance efforts, sustainable finance, capital deployment, public policy efforts, all sort of come to Anne. And so we're really, really pleased that you're able to be here with us today. And then we also have Ralph Izzo, who's the chairman and president of and CEO of PSEG, the power company for New Jersey, I like to say. Ralph in his career has started off with a PhD in physics, but also a business degree, and has been running the company for almost a decade, and a champion of energy efficiency as much as all the different innovative technologies need, from nuclear to renewable energy. And then also with us is Jamie Gentoso, who's CEO of U.S. Cement at LafargeHolcim. It's a large operation in the United States, over 100 cement terminals, cement and kilns and grinding plants, over 3,000 employees. Cement is one of the most important things we have as we build in the built environment. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing from Jamie the work that they're doing looking to the future. So I appreciate you guys joining. And Anne, we'll start off with you on some brief opening comments.
Well, thank you, Bob. And hello, Elliott, Ralph, and Jamie. It's good to be with all of you and our audience too. It's just a very interesting time to be coming together. I think for many years, some of this work was somewhat enigmatic for our employees, for our shareholders, and I can't say enough about the enthusiasm we have felt in the last few years. You know, I meet with, along with a few other people, the top 50 shareholders in our company. And 4 or 5 years ago, if you were talking about ESG and particularly about climate, it might be an excuse to get up and have a cup of coffee, or someone would make a phone call or something. And today, seated across from you, this year virtually, but the last few years in person, we have portfolio managers and ESG specialists, and they're asking very, very incisive questions, which just gives you a sense of the focus on ESG and particularly on climate. More and more of our clients are seeking to be carbon neutral on their way to net zero. I would tell you a few years ago, they had no idea what either of those terms meant. We are carbon neutral ourselves. It took us longer than I thought it would to get there. And yet in getting there, it's a roadmap for our clients. So we've just seen an awful lot of activity in the same way that I think you see other big social movements, whether it's Me Too, LGBTQ+, and even the social and racial injustice or justice movements in the violent deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. These things, they are present with us for many years, but there just seems to be a crucible moment, and I think we're at it now. And the idea would be, and the hope would be, that we can harness that energy and make it productive. So I think that the Biden administration announcing, even before he took office, but certainly since, the recommitment to the Paris Agreement, to net zero, the work of John Kerry and Gina McCarthy, and you've heard other members of the cabinet speak to climate, the need for infrastructure change in order for us to get a grid that can be more universal in terms of renewables. I think that's all within reach. And then I'll just finally say, from the financial services world, I think we have been able to come together and thinking about not just the underwriting and issue of green bonds or how to deal with tax equity, but actually how to help our companies get to net zero, first carbon neutrality, and what it's going to take by working with you, with other not-for-profits and NGOs. But I have to say, C2ES has really been helpful in terms of your very productive work, particularly in the legislative and regulatory front. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to hearing others today.
Okay, and thank you. Really appreciate it. Ralph, I'm going to turn to you now to give us some insight of what you guys are up to and a little bit on the power sector, perhaps.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here with you. C2ES always hosts very robust conversations on these topics. And congratulations on the latest policy brief. We're proud to be one of the 47 companies that signed on to that, along with Jamie and Ann, and being on the panel with them, such well-known thought leaders, is truly an honor. So PSEG has, for over a century, prided itself on providing safe, reliable, economic, and energy. Those definitions changed over time as to what constituted, in particular, clean. So right now, as we continue to evolve, we've laid out a vision, a three-part vision for the future that says we want to work every day to help our customers use less energy. And that was not an internet bobble there. You heard that right. We want to work to help our customers use less energy. And we want the energy they use to be cleaner than ever before. And we saw that evolve from acid rain gases to mercury to fine particulates, and now it includes carbon dioxide. What most of us learned in high school chemistry was the components of bubbles in our soda, and now we realize is a critical emission to restrict. So use less, use cleaner, and to deliver it more reliably than ever before, because there is an element of mitigation that has to be taken into consideration, given that we haven't moved quickly enough already in the climate arena. And then we recommend 5 different steps to bringing about this new future. One, and most importantly, and I love to see it in your policy paper, is a economy-wide price on carbon, so that we can make rational economic decisions and maximize every environmental dollar we spend. Then number 2 would be to do a much better job in the United States on energy efficiency. We are, by virtually every definition, an energy hub in this country, whether you take energy per capita or energy per dollar of GDP or a variety of other measures. We could be doing better. Third is to preserve our nuclear fleet, because we believe that in order to make progress, you shouldn't give away the benefits that you have in place. And nuclear produces over 50% of our carbon-free electricity in the country. Next, as you pointed out, Bob, is to invest heavily in renewables. PSEG is New Jersey's leading solar energy provider, and we are recently announced a partnership with Ørsted to invest in offshore wind. And then lastly, once you've reduced the amount of energy people have used and you've cleaned up the electric supply, to electrify the economy. And that probably should begin with transportation, which has now overtaken the electric power sector as the #1 source of carbon in the United States. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. I'm sure I'll learn a lot. And with that, I'll stop and turn it back to you, Bob. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. That was a great summary and outlines many of the things I think many of your colleagues in the industry are doing as well. So Jamie, I'm so happy you're here with us, because I know you guys have tremendous challenges, but great opportunities, and I know you're looking at all of them. So I'm going to turn it over to you and hear what LafargeHolcim and U.S. Cement is up to.
Sure, great. And I really appreciate being here today with you, Bob and Ralph. Really great opportunity for us to talk about, why we believe business and industry, we need ambitious bipartisan climate action. So we are a big believer in that at LafargeHolcim. So for those of you who don't know LafargeHolcim, we are a global supplier of building materials. We help build the infrastructure that each and every one of us use every day. In the US here, we supply about 18 million tons of cementitious materials, which means we're on about 1 in every 5 construction projects. So we're a big part of everyone's every day. from the bridge you drove across to the hospital you may have been in, to your home, to the sidewalks you walk on. So, really important to us as an emitter of CO2 that we approach this issue. The cement industry is responsible for between 7 and 8% of the world's CO2 and 1 to 2% of the US CO2. So we think it's really important that we're a part of this discussion. And we continue to work on this every day. We have extremely ambitious targets. So a few of the things that we're working on, amongst many things. The first one would be, we're really trying to push low carbon products, to push the procurers of our products toward new innovative products. We have a very slow to move industry that sometimes doesn't like to adopt new products, but we're trying to push those. One of those is what we call Portland limestone cement, which has a reduction of about 10% CO2, and we can make the switch to that today, as long as our customers would accept it. And that is a big reduction in CO2 that, as a cement industry, we can move forward with very quickly, and then have an impact. Little bits can have a big impact. So we're really pushing that. When it comes to fuels, we are a very energy intensive industry. So, we're looking to use some of Ralph's renewable energy as much as possible, but we're also big landowners. So we're looking to put up solar fields and wind farms on our own land so that we can supply energy and make sure that it's renewable. But we also look to use alternative fuels. Our traditional fuels are coal and petcoke. So we are looking to use either waste that would go into the ground, so plastics and tires that can provide good BTU value for us, and also provide some environmental value overall. And then look at using natural gas. So we look to try to use the fuels that have lower CO2 value. And then finally, we are heavily investing right now, at least a lot of our efforts and a lot of different projects out there in carbon capture. So carbon capture is something that's really important to us as an industry. To get to net zero, which is where we believe we can be, we do need carbon capture. Part of making Portland cement, we use limestone. There are process emissions that you just can't get away from. So carbon capture will be a part of that. We've got a large scale project, which is really exciting, working with Total, Oxy, and Savante at our Portland plant in Colorado, where we'll capture 2 million tons of CO2 annually. So we just got a DOE grant on that. Very excited to move forward, and we hope that the project will be shovel ready by the end of 2023, and we'll be capturing carbon by somewhere around 2025. So super exciting. So we're working every day to accelerate our efforts and reduce our CO2 intensity. We really believe that all those efforts that I talked about, we need help from a policy perspective. And we believe that an economy-wide price on carbon is something that can help us get there.
Okay, Jamie, thank you. And I know you skimmed through a lot of the things that you guys are working on there. But I think what everybody who's tuned in has heard from the three of you has been not just what you're doing directly in your own company and your own sectors, but how what you do affects the other sectors. Whether it's building the foundations for the wind turbine, or whether it's working with transportation, whether it's financing, some of the low carbon technologies. Also the procurement side, Jamie, you pointed out. So I want to ask a general question to all of you, and I think we'll just stay with the same order here, just to make it easy as we go through this. But you've all mentioned the work that you're doing, and I think you've all mentioned I think excitement about a potentially stronger federal partner that can help accelerate the work, make your commitments that you've made a little bit more, wind in the sails, let's say, on some of those commitments. So each one of you maybe a little bit on why is policy, and in this case predominantly national policy, but we also obviously are part of the global world. Jamie's company is a global company. Ralph, you're more in the U.S., but obviously a very important part of that. So why is policy engagement important to your company? And how does that work, and how do you see that working into your own goals? So Anne, I'll start with you, and then Ralph, and then Jamie.
Well, to begin with, actually, Europe is really ahead of the US because they do have a framework for a Green Deal. Those words do not mean the same thing in Europe as they mean in the US. And it includes legislation and regulation and a single taxonomy for what is green to begin with. They are promising for the future that there will be the need for transparency for us, any of us, to operate in Europe. We will have to eventually, one assumes, provide our road to net zero, be transparent, use the same taxonomy. So there's some predictability here. I think it is a long way between now and then because the investments in technology, research, battery storage, et cetera, really aren't there yet. But at least there's a framework. We don't really have that in the US, and we need it. And if it is something that we can agree with domestically, but also that it has some international connection, then the marketplace opens up much more quickly. With that, I do think, the price on carbon becomes more not only doable, but manageable. And the world of offsets, which I know is somewhat controversial because one doesn't want to think of offsets as a way to do greenwashing, but they're inevitable on the road to net zero because there's probably no company in today's world that could get immediately to carbon neutrality. In our scopes 1 and 2, the activities in our own operations, there's inevitably going to be something that just doesn't quite make it. And in being allowed to have an offset, there's a very small universe of deciders on that. The World Resource Institute and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they're doing a great job. But once the gates open up and the regulation and legislation in Europe really takes hold, and I think something follows in the US that doesn't have to be legislation, but is momentum, we need some frameworks, and we need to see offsets as maybe a bigger body of work. Mark Carney in the UK, working with Europeans too, has developed this task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets. And I think that has real promise because you could see how offsets could literally, the money for offsets could literally underwrite the research, the technology, the kinds of things that right now take concessionary capital. And unless a government is willing to take that on, and many can't, given how crippled they are with the pandemic, this would allow the capital markets to step in and actually underwrite some of this. So but none of that is possible unless we agree on what is it to get to carbon neutrality, what is it to get to net zero, what is the taxonomy, and what is a legitimate and transparent process.
Thanks, Ralph. On the policy side, where do you see federal policy providing? I'll use another pun: the energy we need to get things done.
At the risk of stating the obvious, Bob, policy directs markets. It directs us towards achieving certain outcomes. And I think the best policy are those policies that say, here's what we want markets to achieve, and steer away from telling markets how to achieve it. Give an example of that. We have production tax credits that wind farms are eligible for, which is a great idea, right? You want to encourage carbon-free energy, but in some markets, that's resulted in negative marginal pricing for electricity.
Right.
Make all of the economists on this in this session right now have palpitations. Well, negative marginal pricing is not possible for a market participant that has real costs, and that results therefore in power plants like nuclear plants, which can't cycle, taking massive losses because they're running at a negative price. So they go out of business. but yet you need the stability of a baseload nuclear plant to meet the needs of energy customers. So what do you do when you can't rely on the wind to blow all the time? You replace that nuclear plant with a natural gas plant, because that's what the system reliability needs. So accidentally, inadvertently, policy removes a carbon-free asset and replaces it with a carbon-intensive asset in the name of reducing carbon emissions. That 3-minute description really requires 30 minutes of explanation. So hopefully it was only slightly coherent. But policy is important to a company like ours because energy is foundational, right? Everybody needs it, everybody uses it. So we want to make sure that there is a very clear set of rules focused on the problem we're trying to solve, in this case, climate change, as opposed to dictating the solutions and methodology for achieving it. So we try to engage in conversations with policymakers about how to maximize the environmental dollar. If the National Academy of Sciences thinks that the social cost of carbon is $50 per ton, let's come up with an economy-wide system so that we can maximize the number of tons we remove for $50 or less, and not do some things like put rooftop solar in locations where it costs $400 per ton to remove carbon. So policy participation is essential to really make progress on this critically important topic of climate change, with all of the ancillary aspects associated with it in terms of environmental justice and the like. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Ralph. There is a lot to unpack in that short description there, but I think most people get the point that we needed to encourage things, but now we need to think about it more holistically. And I think that would be how I'd summarize that particular point. You got to look at the whole as opposed to the individual pieces. And obviously, economic signals in the economy create that kind of a momentum, but we also need to push on some complementary policies to make sure that we're in shape there, whether it's infrastructure or transmission lines to enable that power to move. Jamie, same for you. I know that some of the answers may be similar, but
Yeah.
as you have, as I said at the beginning here, or at the beginning of this question, or you all have your goals and your commitments, which are daunting. And so the question, where does the policy help fulfill that?
Yeah, well, I think the big thing, it's not just any policy, it's good policy. And I think that C2ES does a really good job of laying out, as we move forward with policy, like what's necessary. It needs to be effective, durable, market-based, change over time, and that kind of thing. But for us, the big thing that policy can do is it can level the playing field, right? Make sure the whole industry is playing in the same ballpark and everybody's taking action. So it's not just LafargeHolcim, it's all of our colleagues in the industry that are doing the same thing. And we need engagement of everybody to make things happen. Policy can foster innovation and accelerate deployment. It can change the way people buy. And in particular, I already talked about, the government. They need to change the way that they buy. So really in the end, leveling the playing field, innovation, acceleration, preference for low carbon products, all these things are fundamental to preserving a net zero future. And in the end, policy can help make that happen, right? So for us, those are kind of the big things.
Thank you all for that. It's clear that this intersection is a really important one, and it's something I think, Ann, you said at the beginning of your comment. If you had these conversations in your boardroom or someplace else 6 years ago, even, these connecting things wouldn't be the same. So a very quick question, I think, for all three of you, which I always like to ask when I'm in the presence of this kind of leadership, is, inside your company, what is motivating this? What is how is this coming up, bubbling up, the employees? I think, Ann, you mentioned some of these, the employees, the board, and other investors, customers. A few words on the fact that this is not like a random set of activities. There's a real, I think, moment, I think you called it, Ann. So Ann, again, I'll start with you on, what are some of the forces at play here beyond politics?
Well, there are a lot of forces. First of all, our employees are very focused. And again, I don't think it's an enigmatic thought anymore. It's a reality, and people are recognizing someone's home and too many forest fires in California, or the breathing, the rise in asthma, to focus the mind. And if we can not let perfect be the enemy of good, what I see is that we have lots of things that have happened in the last decade. Diversity of the board, diversity of the management team, diversity of the workforce helps, because that engages people and conversations happen. These health issues are real. These fires are real, the rising level of ocean. So it's not it's very tangible for people at the moment. And then for us, from a practical level, we just see our own clients who are very interested. I'll even just use ourselves. We're the largest underwriter of green bonds and the largest tax equity lender. And we've issued some bonds ourselves, green bonds. And every time we've done it, it's 2 and 3 times oversubscribed and immediate. So the interest from the client base is great. The interest from the investor community is great. And the kinds of commitments we made just a few years ago, we made a commitment in 2019 that we would do $300 billion of environmental business. So in of ESG, just on the E, by 2030. But we did 60 billion in 2020, which was a bad year. So already we see the momentum is double what we thought it was. And this was beyond just the right thing to do. People see business opportunity, they see momentum, and they see these practical issues. And then again, as I said to you, we're hearing from our institutional shareholders. So all of that together is pushing this whole issue forward.
And that's been evident for the last 4 years without federal engagement at all.
Yes.
Ralph, your own views on these.
Yeah, Bob, if you look at our industry, I don't know how many companies there are, but there's an awful lot that begin with the words public service, right? Our company is Public Service Enterprise Group. So for years, the industry has prided itself on being in the vanguard of universal access to public good, whether it's the provision of electricity or the provision of clean electricity or safe electricity. Clearly, our employees are 1,000% behind it. They love being part of a company that is viewed as a great corporate citizen. And as you pointed out, this is broader than just climate change. This is across the spectrum of ESG issues. We've given $5 million this year for various COVID-19 related causes, countless pairs of N95 masks and gloves. We've given $2 to $3 million on social justice issues to organizations that are battling systemic racism. 13 years in a row on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and quite candidly, a tremendous influx of investor money into ESG funds nowadays. So you're seeing this come from all quarters, from the employee population, both new and folks who've been around for a while, both the pride in the company called Public Service, and then the movements that you see in the investor community. And these are pressing problems that just won't go away. I think the big difference nowadays is that the public in general is eager to see business leaders participate, and that silence is no longer acceptable when you see an issue. You need to get in the game.
Jamie.
Yeah, so not to belabor some of the points, but a lot of it is coming from the investment community. But what's really interesting to me is what we're seeing more so from our employee base. And there, I think the pride that we've seen from our net zero commitment, and like I just had a talk talking about kicking off 2021 today with a group of employees, and 3 of them had questions about, where we're going from a sustainability perspective and what is our path. And I literally brought up our roadmap and said, this is how we're going to get to where we need to be. So, I don't think we had employee engagement like that previously. And also it's interesting as as you look to hire new employees, one of their first questions, it's like they're interviewing you and they're saying, what are you doing to save the environment? And you're a big polluter. So it's really interesting that, that we, people again are coming to us and saying, I don't want to work for you if you're going to, if you're going to have such a negative impact on the environment. In the end, I come back and say to them, well, think of the greater impact you can have in fixing us, right? As we move towards net zero. So, and then the other pieces, we're seeing a lot of, I guess what I'll call activist owners, some of these larger companies that are building, and they're demanding from us and from the building environment that we do have lower carbon products. So that's where we're seeing some acceleration. For example, we just did a large pour last month with Boston University with our EcoPact product, which is 30% reduced CO2 emissions. So, they would not have moved forward with a cement or concrete supplier that could not have that solution. So, in the end, more than ever, people are putting environmental responsibility and expectations as at the top of their list, right? So it means we must too.
Could I just add one thing, Bob, here, because it sort of affects all of us. In years gone by, in order to invest in climate or ESG more generally, it was seen as concessionary capital, and often it was. But now it isn't. These funds, these investments, not only match the rest of the industry, but they generally exceed. And those companies that are invested in ESG, as you see from both Ralph and Jamie, is that they're doing better, they're performing better, they're less apt to have and issues with regulators. So listen, this isn't a panacea, but the truth is that it makes a big difference that those elements that are focused on ESG are performing as well as they are, even in a pandemic year, because that gives momentum that none of us, no matter what we said, would be able to move quite so quickly on.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that intersection of ESG and how that has evolved as well over the last number of years, and how it adds a very strong dimension of transparency to all these efforts. So, Jamie, you have something to show the employees and the prospective employees. And I was going to ask a question. I'm going to move on here in a minute, but I was going to ask a question about how you see some of this as important to your own company's competitiveness. You've touched on it, Jamie. Your prospective employees, but maybe a quick round on the competitiveness side and how you see how important this is to you. And you've started this part of the conversation, so bring it back.
Just very brief. Yeah, just very briefly. With so many companies globally, in Europe, they're going to have to get to net zero by regulation. I think in the US, that's going to follow quickly. And many, even before they have to, are declaring they will get to first carbon neutrality and net zero. That takes financing. If you're a company, a bank like ours that have the products and the services and the expertise, and you're out in the market already, we've seen it as a competitive advantage already. So it's already a benefit to the company and to our shareholders.
Ralph?
Bob, we're an infrastructure company, and our earnings go up when regulators approve of investment decisions we make in infrastructure. And one of the biggest programs we have coming up is a $1 billion energy efficiency program. We spend $400 million a year replacing old gas pipes to minimize methane emissions. We were recently granted approval to invest in advanced metering so that we can get more granular data on customer usage, so we can even further enhance those customer energy efficiency programs that we're talking about. So really, by being able to invest in infrastructure that facilitates carbon mitigation and climate change mitigation, we do our shareholders a favor.
Jamie, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I hope none of my competitors are watching this, but I truly see it as a differentiator and a competitive advantage to lead here, right? Because in the end, LafargeHolcim will be far ahead of their competitors, and we're taking all these steps on our own before there's a price on carbon, right? We will be ready. We'll be in a position that we can deliver what our customers need in terms of low carbon products. And, we'll be the first to net zero. So I clearly see it as a competitive advantage. And not only that, the right thing to do, right? So we're, I think as a company, headed in the right direction.
So here's a question that I'll ask you each to talk about, and then I'll start looking at seeing what the audience is. I see there's some activity down there on the audience side. I'll try to screen through that with the team. But so we've been talking about the present, and we've been talking about goals. But I'd like each of you to say something briefly about where you see your sector going. This is popping out of your company particularly, and saying, well, where's the financial sector going? Where's the building materials sector going? Where's the power sector going? Where do you see that movement in the next decade, let's say? And I'll start with you.
Thanks. Well, I think that we have to become the experts for our clients, because unlike other industries, we all have this scope 1, 2, and 3, but for the financial sector, for us to be net zero means all our clients have to be net zero. And that's a rather daunting task, but it's a motivation to help them get there. And we do believe in the transition, because 80% of the world is fueled by fossil fuel energy. About 5% of our lending book is, maybe less, is to fossil fuel companies. And those are fossil fuel companies that are trying to make the transition, but it will be difficult. So I think that for us and meaning the industry, an expertise in the products, the services, the taxonomy, helping with consolidating the views of transparency and reporting. This is all not only in our interest, but we think we can help our clients, and that company, that financial institution that does it best is going to be a winner here.
Ralph?
Clearly, so many of the companies in our industry have made net zero commitments, each with their own different time frame. And clearly, one has to be careful of greenwashing. I'm not going to get into that specifics, but in general, the trend in the industry is to move towards net zero. My hope for the industry, though, is that we're allowed to expand our investment base and not just be concerned with supplying clean energy, but reducing the overall amount of energy that's used, to really move into what had traditionally been the competitive world of the customer choosing devices that are energy using devices. But sadly, throughout history, customers have shown little interest in choosing those devices with a mind towards minimum energy consumption. I'm not talking about the household chandelier in the dining room. I'm talking about the heating system in the basement, the air conditioning system in the attic, and those things. I think that that's an area where customers will happily allow their utilities to engage with a mind towards overall reduction in electricity.
Very interesting. And Jamie?
Yeah, so I guess much like Ralph, I also see, so I started with LafargeHolcim 20 years ago. And when I first started, we were pushing lower carbon products. I came back 18 years later and we were still doing the same thing and almost in the same position. But I have hope now. And I see, where customers may start to make better decisions and look at, the better choices they can make and the new products that we can offer. I mean, I get it. Our products hold up 100-story buildings and hold back millions of gallons of water. So they need to be making good decisions about the cementitious products that they're using. But we've got good proven products. And I'm hopeful that we will accelerate much faster over the next 5 years versus what we've seen in the last 20 as we move forward for a net zero future, right?
All right, well, it's 10 minutes before our time will be up, and we want to get to some of the questions from the audience. And so we've consolidated some of them. There's a lot of similar type of questions come in, but the first one's going to sort of put you a little bit on the spot in terms of what you think might happen. And we've all mentioned carbon pricing. And there are a number of questions saying, well, what do you guys think about carbon pricing in this Congress? Is this something, do you see a path forward? Are these is carbon taxes and cap and trade? These are dirty words. Is there any, do you see any movement or a path forward with the Congress to get something done on that?
Well, I'll speak first. I'm not sure if there'll be congressional movement in the first year, just because of so many other things that have to be done. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of activity between Gina McCarthy's office and John Kerry's office on looking at what exists today and where they can do some enforcement. I think you're going to see an outreach to the business community to see if we can agree on a coordinated taxonomy. So what is green, what is and what is an offset, and can we get some real momentum around that so that we can find some capital to put behind technology and a number of things that might otherwise not happen in Congress. So meaning that Congress may not be able to allocate additional funds. There may be able to. The U.S. is different than any other market because we are unapologetic in our being capitalist. That's our economic system. And as a result, I think that we can create a market that might not happen otherwise much more quickly. So I think that carbon pricing will be an outcome of that rather than regulated from the start. So I think momentum will happen before the regulation, and meaning before the legislation.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in on this?
You know, I'll just offer, Bob. I know that the practicality of it in this Congress is quite low, but I'm just an optimist, and I think that rational thinking eventually prevails. And I'm a believer that you tax bad things and you don't tax good things. I think wealth creation is a good thing. I think emitting carbon dioxide is a bad thing. And there's no shortage of what you can do with the money. You could recycle it back in terms of a consumer dividend. If it's regressive, you can use it to build infrastructure. You can use it to enhance education. You can use it to reduce the national debt, which is now 101% of GDP. So I remain optimistic that at some point this can be made real.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, I remain hopeful that it'll happen, but I hope it doesn't happen within the next year because I hope there's some good thought put behind it, right? You know, I don't want to see them race to put a carbon tax in place because it does need to, we do need to make sure that it works for business and that we can meet the goals that it's looking to achieve.
And the idea of rewarding what is got momentum while perhaps dealing with those that go the other way. Trying to be diplomatic.
Yeah, I mean, there's this whole issue of, you know, is carbon tax by itself the way to do this? Are there other things that will harness the market forces? You know, and you can look at the good and the bad, or you can look at the desired and the undesired, you know, whatever way you want it. But can you create incentives here and disincentives there? And how do you get
there are incentives already. I mean, there are tax incentives now. You might begin by looking at those. Are they not just are they expansive enough, but do they hit at the heart of what we want in terms of behavior? Yeah, which could take a second look.
Yeah, and Ralph mentioned some of the anomalies that can occur if you don't start looking at it more holistically.
Right.
Ralph, I can't help myself. I have to say that notwithstanding the amount of debt as opposed to the, Anne will probably kick me if she could under the table here, but it's all virtual. I think the debt service is less than 5% of the GDP. And the interest rates are very low. And the need is very high. So I'll just stop there. You know, I know that I fret about the debt as much as anybody, but I also think we have a lot of other things going on here.
And the interest rates are going to stay low. So, I mean, there's an argument for that. Yeah.
You know, I don't know how much, and somebody needs to set up that marker, but there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Looking at these this possibility in the Congress. What have, I mean, I know that I've involved in conversations with members of the United States Congress, with several of you, but what is it that the companies can do, to try to help move things along, in terms of, I mean, obviously your example is probably the penultimate thing you can do, but how do you translate that into, I'm going to use this word, influence, to try to get the Congress to move?
And use the phrase that is one of my favorites, is that we can make sure that people not allow perfection to become the enemy of the good, and that compromise on certain issues, whether it's enhanced R to make technology more affordable, some clean energy standard that doesn't have an explicit price on carbon, things that I think the middle can get behind.
Yeah. Any additional thoughts, Ann or Jamie, on what can the business? I noticed the Business Roundtable has come out with new positions. The Chamber last week adjusted its position. You guys are all members, or I think you're all members, and so obviously there's movement afoot. So
Well, I think you're going to see, if I could just say, I think you're going to see a winnowing down. Right now, we've got TCFD, we have the alphabet soup of initiatives and standard setters, rating agencies, deciders. So I think that if we can agree on a taxonomy, what's green, that would go a long way. I think we will get some help with that, because those of us who are multinationals are going to have to comply with the European definition of green. And that momentum should help us at least reduce confusion, so that as we interact with our legislators and our regulators, we approach it with some kind of unified thought, at least on what is and isn't green, and transparency. Because if we're willing to be transparent in our route to carbon neutrality, net zero, that's going to tell a pretty important tale.
All right, well, any last parting thing, because we got less than 60 seconds left here. And that was a great summary of the work that I think we all need to do. I know you guys are working inside your trade associations as well as with the members of Congress, and I think those are all things that we all need to be doing together. I want to thank you, all three of you, for joining us today to talk about what you're doing, but also about what the business community is doing and how things are different today, perhaps, than they were 10 or 5 or even 5 years ago. And I think that's the moment, Ann, that is before us, with a more receptive Congress, and on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
Not that it is easy, but it's receptive on both sides of the aisle to talk about these things, and a more supportive administration. I think we have the moment before us, and you guys are going to play an important role. So I thank you for coming and talking about what you're doing and what you think. I think we're at the end of the hour.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
having us, Bob.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.